My daughter was 8 months pregnant when her husband forced her to kneel in a freezing rainstorm over a $65 dress. He didn't know I was watching from the shadows. He didn't know I'd spent the last 6 months buying up every single cent of his debt. And he definitely didn't know that by the time the sun came up, I'd be his new landlord and his absolute worst nightmare. See, this isn't just a story about a father's revenge. This is about how you dismantle a dynasty, piece by piece. I stood there, rain soaking through my canvas coat, until it weighed 50 pounds, just staring at a scene that is burned into my retinas forever. My little girl, my Daisy, sprawled on the wet pavement, broken, humbled in a way no human being should ever be. Before I get into the grit of what I did to the people who tore her down, you need to understand the why behind it. This isn't just some vent post born out of raw, red-hot anger. Honestly, it's a chronicle of calculated justice. If you're sitting at home right now, maybe nursing a coffee, or scrolling through this on your lunch break, I want you to really think about what family means to you. If you believe that blood is sacred, and that some lines should never be crossed, then you're in the right place. We're building something here, a community that doesn't just look the other way when things get ugly. My name is Clint, and for 30 years, I was a logistics guy in Bristol. I spent my days staring at shipping manifests and freight schedules, keeping my head down and my nose clean. Every penny I saved, every hour of overtime I pulled, it was all for my only child, Daisy. Now, I knew things about the movement of money that Grayson, with all his fancy law degrees, couldn't even imagine. I had a silver bullet tucked away in an old brokerage account from 2004. A secret that would eventually be the reason Grayson ended up standing on a sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on his back. But I wasn't ready to fire that shot yet. I had to wait for him to slip up. After her mother passed, Daisy became my entire world. She was the only bit of color in an otherwise gray life. She was the kind of soul who'd stop to save a worm from a puddle. Beautiful. Soft-hearted. Maybe just a little too gentle for a world that loves to eat people like her for breakfast. When she first brought Grayson home, I genuinely thought she'd hit the jackpot. He was charming, in that polished, effortless way that only comes with old money and expensive schools. The Sterlings were a big deal in the city, the kind of family whose name is etched into the brass plaques of half the buildings downtown. I wanted to believe the fairy tale. I really did. But I've learned the hard way that most fairy tales are just horror stories waiting for the lights to go out. The beginning? It was a masterclass in orchestration. Grayson was a solicitor, always draped in charcoal gray wool that cost more than my first car. He had a silver tongue that could sell ice to an Eskimo. Every Friday, without fail, he'd show up with a bouquet of lilies for Daisy. He'd hold every door, pull out every chair. He even addressed me as sir. With just the right amount of practiced deference, I watched her through the kitchen window sometimes. I'd see her with her wild curls tucked back and her fingers permanently stained with cobalt blue and ochre paint. She was a brilliant artist, though she'd never admit it, and I prayed he would cherish that light in her. But the cracks started appearing early, tiny fissures in the dam that I tried to convince myself weren't there. It started with the gentle corrections. He'd fix her pronunciation of a French wine in front of his colleagues, his voice sounding like velvet dipped in acid. "Darling, it's Moe, not Moet," he'd say, with that tight, patronizing smile. Then came the wardrobe suggestions. He'd mention almost as an afterthought that the vibrant yellow sundress she loved was a bit loud for a Sterling family brunch. Daisy would just blink, that sweet, accommodating smile never wavering, and she'd head upstairs to change into something beige, something stifling. She was blinded by the glare of the life he was promising her. She couldn't see the shadow he was casting over her own personality. So, the first time the air truly turned cold, I mean really cold, was at the engagement dinner. We were at some high-end bistro, the kind where the menus don't have prices, and the lighting is designed to make everyone look like a museum painting. Grayson's mother, Beatrice, was there. Honestly, she wore pearls like they were a suit of armor. She took one look at my hands, my rough, calloused, working man hands, and she handed me a salad fork with this tiny, pitying smirk. She then spent 3 whole minutes explaining which fork was for which course. Her voice was just dripping with the kind of generosity that's actually meant to make you feel like dirt. But it wasn't the cutlery that made my stomach turn. It was Grayson. He didn't look at me once while his mother was belittling my entire life. He was just staring at Daisy. And for a split second, the mask slipped. I didn't see love in his eyes. I saw the look a collector gives a rare piece of porcelain. It was possession, pure and simple. Then came the wedding. A massive, sterile affair at a manor house in the Cotswolds. It probably had its own zip code. The Sterlings paid for everything. They insisted on total perfection, which was really just a way to treat me like a guest they'd invited out of pity. I offered to cover the flowers, I wanted to contribute something to my daughter's day. But Beatrice? She just waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. "Oh, Clint," she said, her voice like ice clinking in a glass. "We have a specific florist who only handles high-budget estates. Don't worry your head about it." I stood at the back of that church, feeling the rough fabric of my suit, and I felt like an intruder at my own daughter's wedding. When I walked her down the aisle, I felt her hand trembling on my arm. It wasn't that excited. I'm getting married flutter. It was a rhythmic, nervous twitch. I leaned in and whispered, "Are you happy, Daisy? Just say the word and we're out of here." She looked at Grayson, standing there like a statue of a god, and the trembling just stopped. "I am, Dad," she said. "He's going to take care of me." That phrase, it stuck in my throat. Take care of her. It implies she's helpless, like she's a ward to be managed instead of a partner to be loved. I handed her over. And Grayson? He didn't even acknowledge me. He just turned his back, physically and metaphorically blocking me from her view. It was a tactical maneuver. Honestly, looking back, the whole reception was just a blur of expensive champagne and speeches where Grayson talked about how he had refined Daisy, like she was a piece of raw ore he'd pulled from a mine. I sat there at the edge of the room, nursing a drink, watching the woman I raised slowly begin to disappear, behind a curtain of sterling silver. I'm going to be honest. The clinking of crystal and that forced, hollow laughter from the dining room, it just started fading into a dull hum as I sat there at the edge of the den, nursing a lukewarm drink. I watched the woman I raised my Daisy slowly, and I mean times slowly asterisk, begin to disappear behind a heavy curtain of sterling silver. Now look, that first year of marriage is supposed to be the honeymoon phase, right? You're supposed to be high on life, ordering way too much takeout, and making those stupid inside jokes. But for Daisy, honestly, it was the beginning of an eraser. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was just this slow, agonizing sanding down of her soul. The first thing to go? It was the literal smell of her life. See, Daisy's old room in Bristol. It always smelled like linseed oil and cedar wood. It was this messy, beautiful sanctuary of creativity. But then, one Sunday, I noticed her hands were scrubbed raw. The skin around her fingernails was pink, peeling. She told me Grayson didn't like the industrial scent of turpentine in their pristine, white-marbled townhouse. He claimed it gave him migraines. So, she packed her easels into the basement. And just like that, the color started draining out of her world. Then, the visits started thinning out. I'd suggest a Saturday lunch at our favorite Greasy Spoon, and she'd hesitate. Her voice would drop an octave as she checked a digital calendar I times new times he managed. She'd say Grayson liked her to be home when he returned from the firm, to decompress together. I'd try to call her on a Tuesday afternoon just to say hi, but more often than not, Grayson would pick up. "She's in the bath, Clint," or "she's napping. The poor thing is just exhausted," he'd say. His voice was always so smooth, like expensive bourbon, but it made my skin crawl. When I actually did get her on the phone, she sounded like she was reading from a teleprompter. She'd talk about guest lists and charities. This was my girl who used to talk about the lighting in a subway station. She was reciting a script written by a man who viewed her as nothing more than a decorative asset. Eventually, the distance grew unbearable. So, one Tuesday, I decided to just drive over. I remember the smell of the neighborhood freshly cut grass and that weirdly sterile rich person air. I found her in the backyard, standing perfectly still, just staring at a rose bush like she was trying to memorize its geometry. She looked hollow, and when she heard my footsteps on the gravel, she didn't smile. She flinched. Her eyes darted toward the tinted windows of the house, her fingers twisting the fabric of her silk blouse. "Dad, you shouldn't be here," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Grayson doesn't like unannounced guests. It disrupts the schedule." I just stood there, my car keys digging into my palm. A time schedule asterisk? My daughter was living by a damn timetable in her own home. She was terrified of a man who claimed to protect her. Then, we got the news. Daisy was pregnant. For a few days, I let myself feel a flicker of hope. I figured a baby would soften Grayson's sharp edges. I was so incredibly wrong. That pregnancy didn't bring freedom. It became the ultimate cage. Grayson began micromanaging every single calorie that passed her lips, every hour she spent with her eyes closed. He framed it as protecting the heir, but we all know what it really was. It was total, undisputed ownership. He cut off her access to their joint accounts, claiming she was too scatterbrained to handle the finances. He put her on a literal allowance, like she was a teenager asking for gas money. I found this out during a rare coffee date when her card was declined for a $3 latte. The look on her face, the way she turned crimson while the barista stared. "It haunts me. He must have forgotten to transfer the funds," she stammered. Her hands were shaking so hard, the lid rattled on the cup. It breaks a father's heart to see his child stripped of her dignity for the price of a cup of coffee. If you're reading this and you feel that heavy, sickening ache in your chest, it's because you know this story. You know someone whose voice is being systematically silenced. But here's the thing. The abuse wasn't a closed fist. At least, not yet. It was financial and emotional strangulation. Grayson and his mother, Beatrice, treated my daughter like a high-end surrogate. Beatrice would swan into the house daily, running a gloved finger over the baseboards. "You're gaining too much weight, dear," she'd say, sipping tea that cost more than my weekly groceries. Grayson hates sloppy women. Daisy was 6 months pregnant. She was times to be gaining weight, but she simply bowed her head in obedience and pushed the plate of food away. I couldn't just sit on my hands anymore. I'm a logistics man. I know how to track moving parts. So, I started digging into the Sterling family's immaculate life. I spent my retirement days in the public records office, breathing in the scent of old paper and dust. And what I found? It was a goldmine of hypocrisy. The Sterling wealth was a house of cards held together by spit and prayer. They lived on credit, reputation, and the physical manifestations of power that they couldn't actually afford. Grayson's firm was secretly bleeding money. They were facing 2 quiet malpractice suits. They were spending like kings to maintain the illusion while the foundation was rotting. The Sterling wealth was a house of cards held together by spit and prayer. Honestly, they lived on credit, reputation, and the physical manifestations of power that they couldn't actually afford. Grayson's firm was secretly bleeding money. They were facing 2 quiet malpractice suits that would ruin him if they ever hit the tabloids. They were spending like kings to maintain the illusion, while the foundation was rotting. Then came the breaking point. It arrived on a Tuesday evening. Daisy called me, her voice a jagged, sobbing mess. "He threw away my paints, Dad. All of them. Even the ones Mom gave me." She told me he claimed the nursery needed the space. He told her he didn't want the baby exposed to low-class hobbies. My blood didn't just boil. It turned to ice. I told her to come home to Bristol right then. I told her I had her room ready. There was a long, terrifying silence on the other end. "I can't," she whispered. "He told me if I leave, his lawyers will make sure I never see the baby. He's been keeping files on me, Dad. He took my old teenage diaries. And he's twisting my words to make me look mentally unstable. He told her he'd made copies. He told her if she ever left, those diaries would be in the hands of a court psychologist within the hour. What he didn't know was that I had already found his black box. A folder on his private server that contained something far more incriminating than a teenager's secrets. I just needed one physical key to unlock it. The trap was shut. They had isolated her, drained her bank account, and now they were using her unborn child as a ransom note. But Grayson forgot one thing. I had spent 30 years moving mountains of freight. I knew exactly how to dismantle a machine piece by piece. But I had to be smart about this. Surgical even. If I went in there swinging, Grayson would have the police on speed dial before my boot even hit the hardwood. He'd paint me as the unhinged working-class father-in-law to a judge. They'd use my own temper to bury Daisy in a custody battle before the baby even drew its first breath. I couldn't give them that ammunition, so I decided to play the long game. I leaned into the role of the harmless, fading old man. I stopped the side eyes. I stopped the challenging questions. I traded my dignity for a seat at their table. I forced myself to apologize for overstepping. Honestly, I was practically choking on the words as I swallowed my pride. I even started sending Beatrice bouquets of hydrangeas and little trinkets. I watched her smug smile grow as she thought she'd finally broken me. It tasted like literal ash in my mouth, but it worked. The sterling started leaving the door cracked, just enough for me to see the rot inside. While they were busy feeling superior, I was liquidating my life in the shadows. I put my house in Bristol on the market quietly, moving through the paperwork like a ghost. See, back in the early 2000s, I dumped my savings into a niche logistics tech startup. Everyone said it was a pipe dream. It wasn't. I had money now. Real, liquid, heavy-hitting capital. Not the kind of reputation and debt wealth the Sterlings used to decorate their lives. I kept that secret locked tight. I kept wearing my frayed corduroy jacket. I kept driving my 10-year-old sedan that rattled every time it hit 40 miles per hour. Then, late November hit. A bitter winter seeped into the city. The air felt like it was made of iron and gray ice. It was the kind of cold that doesn't just make you shiver. It crawls into your bone marrow and stays there. Daisy was 8 months along. Her once lithe frame was heavy with the weight of my grandson. Her ankles were swollen to the point of pain. She was moving like she was walking through chest-deep water, exhausted by the sheer effort of existing under Grayson's roof. Grayson was hosting one of his power dinners for the firm partners that Friday. He'd laid out a demand for Daisy to look presentable. That was his code for looking like a trophy. He handed her a budget for a new dress that was a total joke. Barely $60 to shop at the high-end boutiques he insisted she frequent. It was a setup, a twisted little game designed to make her feel small when she inevitably failed to meet his impossible standards. But Daisy actually found something. A deep navy silk gown that draped beautifully over her bump. It made her look like a Renaissance painting. It was $65 over the budget he'd set. So she dipped into the emergency cash I'd hidden in her coat lining months ago to cover the difference. She was so proud of herself when she told me. She thought she'd finally cracked the code. She thought she'd found a way to make him happy. She thought she'd done something good. I wasn't invited to the dinner, of course. I was just the logistics man from Bristol. So, I spent the evening parked 2 houses down. The interior of my car smelled like stale coffee and desperation. I'd been doing that a lot lately, just sitting in the dark, watching the warm glow of their windows, and waiting for a signal I hoped would never come. According to what Daisy told me later, Grayson was the picture of the doting husband while the wine was flowing and the partners were watching. But the second the last BMW pulled out of the driveway, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The second the last BMW pulled out of the driveway, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Grayson didn't scream. See, that was the terrifying part about him. He never raised his voice. He just went cold, dead cold. His voice dropped to this low, lethal whisper as he demanded the receipt for that navy dress. "You stole from me," he said. His eyes were narrowed into slits just watching her. Daisy tried to explain. She told him she'd used her own money, my money for the difference. But honestly, that just fueled the fire. So, you're taking handouts from that old man now? You're making me look like a failure who can't even provide for his own wife? His ego was like a glass ornament, beautiful to look at, but incredibly sharp once it breaks. He snatched the receipt from her hand and threw it right into the fireplace. We both just watched the paper curl into black nothingness. And Beatrice? She was just hovering in the background like a vulture. She didn't lift a finger to help. She just let out this dry, rattling laugh. She needs to learn the value of a pound, Grayson, she remarked, sipping her cognac. The girl has been spoiled. Spoiled? My Daisy had worked 2 jobs just to get through university while these people were born on third base. Grayson looked at my daughter with a level of disgust you'd usually reserve for something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. The dress goes, he spat. And since you can't follow simple instructions, you need a reminder of where you stand in this house. He actually demanded she take the dress off, right there in the living room. He was using humiliation like a scalpel, trying to bleed out the last of her spirit. When Daisy refused and tried to retreat upstairs to the safety of the bedroom, Grayson's hand shook, but enough to jerk her entire body to a halt. You will learn respect, he hissed. I was sitting in my car nursing that lukewarm coffee when the front door finally swung open. A figure stumbled out onto the porch. It was Daisy. She was still in that navy silk dress, but she was shivering so hard she could barely stay upright. And then, I saw Grayson's hand on her shoulder. He shoved her out into the night. You love that expensive dress so much? Fine. Stay out here and think about it. Maybe the frost will clear your head. He slammed the oak door. I heard the heavy, sickening thud of the deadbolt sliding home. The rain started then. A freezing, sleeting mess that turned the driveway into a sheet of black glass. Daisy banged on the door. Her voice was just this thin, wavering plea. She was begging him to let her in. She was reminding him about the baby. But inside? The light stayed warm and golden. Through the curtains, I could see their shadows. Grayson and Beatrice, pouring fresh drinks, completely indifferent to the pregnant woman freezing on their doorstep. Daisy eventually gave up. Her legs gave out as she tried to navigate the porch steps without shoes. She was only in stockings. Her feet slipped on the wet stones, and she collapsed. Right there in the driveway, she curled into a ball, tucking her knees up as best she could to protect her stomach from the sleet. My son-in-law had forced my 8-month pregnant daughter to kneel in a freezing downpour, over $65. I didn't say a word to the empty car. I just moved. The rage vibrating through my chest wasn't that hot, messy anger you see in movies. It was white, cold, blinding, and absolute. It was the kind of clarity that only comes when you realize the person you're looking at isn't a man. He's a predator. I threw my car door open and hit the pavement running. I'm gonna be real with you. I didn't say a single word to that empty car. I just moved. The rage vibrating through my chest, it wasn't that hot, messy anger you see in the movies. It was white, cold, blinding, and absolute. It was the kind of clarity that only hits you when you realize the person you're looking at isn't a man, he's a predator. I threw my car door open and hit the pavement running. My work boots were heavy, splashing through the icy puddles as I charged toward that house. I was done playing the long game. I was done being the submissive old man. Honestly, I was coming for every single thing they owned. I reached Daisy in seconds. She looked like a ghost. Her skin was this terrifying shade of blue under the amber streetlights, and her teeth were chattering with a metallic clicking sound. Her eyes were glazed, struggling to focus on my face while she shivered in that ruined navy silk. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she stuttered. The words were barely catching on her frozen breath. Think about that for a second. She was literally freezing to death on her own driveway, her body trying to protect an unborn child, and her first instinct was to apologize for the inconvenience. That apology? It broke the last remaining piece of the man I used to be, and in its place, it built something dangerous, something that didn't care about playing nice or logistic schedules anymore. I stripped off my heavy canvas coat, the one that smelled like old cedar and grease, and I wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. She was pure dead weight as I hauled her up. Her wet stockings kept slipping on the stones. "Get in the car, Daisy," I commanded. My voice sounded like gravel under a boot. She started weeping about her keys, her phone, her life inside that house, but I just looked her dead in the eye. "You won't need anything from that house. Ever again," I said. I slid her into the passenger seat and cranked the heater to the max. Then, I turned back toward the townhouse. My eyes were locked on that expensive, polished oak door. I didn't knock, and I sure as hell wasn't going to ring the bell like some polite guest. I planted my left foot, and I drove my right boot directly into the lock. Now, look, adrenaline is a hell of a drug. It makes a 60-year-old man feel like a human battering ram. It took 2 kicks. On the second one, I heard that satisfying, visceral crack of the frame splintering into toothpicks. The door swung open with a violent crash, bouncing off the interior wall. It was 9 at night, and while my daughter had been kneeling in the sleet, the prominent Sterlings were living large. The entryway smelled like expensive vanilla candles and aged brandy. I stood there, a muddy, soaked demon from the old world, just watching Grayson drop his crystal tumbler. Beatrice let out this thin, shrill scream. Her hand flew to the pearls at her throat, like they could somehow protect her from the sight of me. They just stared at me in stunned silence. Their refined world had suddenly been invaded by a man with absolutely nothing left to lose. "What do you think you're doing?" Grayson finally shouted. He tried to puff out his chest, tried to regain some authority. "I'll have you arrested for breaking and entering. Get out of my house." I walked right into his personal space. I didn't stop until I could smell the expensive cognac on his breath. I didn't blink. I just watched his pupils dilate as he realized. I wasn't the submissive father-in-law anymore. "You have lost everything today," I said. Those 5 words? They were a promise, not a threat. And I could see the flicker of genuine, pathetic fear behind his designer glasses. "Get out," Grayson sneered, but his voice had this high-pitched waver he couldn't hide. "Take your trash daughter and get out of here, before I call the cops." I didn't move an inch. "Oh, I'm taking her," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "And I'm taking this, too." I reached out and grabbed that Ming Dynasty replica vase from the hallway table. You know, the one Beatrice bragged about every time I visited? I just let it slip through my fingers. The sound of that porcelain shattering across the marble floor? Honestly, it was the most beautiful thing I'd heard in years. Beatrice shrieked that I was insane, that the vase was worth thousands. "I'm a father," I corrected her. I stepped right over the blue and white shards. "And you have made a grave miscalculation." I turned my back on them and walked out into the rain, leaving the door wide open to the freezing wind. I drove Daisy to a private clinic 3 towns over. Honestly, I had to avoid the hospital where the Sterlings had friends on the board. I sat in a plastic chair in the hallway, my wet clothes sticking to me, smelling like road salt and old coffee until a doctor finally came out. He told me the baby was okay. He was a fighter, just like his mother. And by the time the sun started peeking through those gray clouds the next morning, the war had officially begun. Grayson played right into my hands. He filed a police report for the door and an emergency custody petition for the unborn child. He cited Daisy's instability and my violent tendencies, thinking his name alone would carry the day. He thought he was winning because he had the right lawyers. But he forgot one thing. I'd been spending my afternoons in the public records office, following the money trail he thought was hidden behind shell companies. Remember the liquidity I mentioned? I didn't just find out Grayson was drowning in debt. I found out who was holding the leash. His mortgage had been bundled into a distressed asset package and sold to a private equity firm called Archon Holdings. Now, here's the kicker. 2 weeks ago, I used my logistics tech Windfall to buy out the majority stake in that firm. I wasn't just his father-in-law anymore, I was his landlord. 3 days after the incident in the rain, Grayson walked into his high-rise office, expecting a normal Tuesday. Instead, he found his partners sitting in a dark boardroom with a thick manila folder in front of them. It was a complete dossier, evidence of every penny he'd embezzled to pay for his mother's lifestyle and his own vanity. I'd spent months connecting those dots, and when I dropped that folder, his career ended before his coffee even got cold. The real chef's kiss moment happened at noon that same day. Grayson slunk back to the townhouse, his tail between his legs, only to find the locks changed and a bailiff standing on the porch. "What is this?" he demanded. His face was turning this blotchy, panicked purple. "This is my house. You can't be here." The bailiff didn't even look up from his clipboard. He just tapped the official notice and said, "Actually, sir, the property has been foreclosed by the lien holder due to a major breach of contract and a total failure to maintain required insurance." Grayson started screaming that he had insurance. But I knew better. I knew he'd let the policy lapse 3 months ago just to cover the cost of the flowers for that gaudy wedding. It was a standard immediate foreclosure clause. He was standing on the sidewalk of the home he thought made him a king, realizing he was nothing but a tenant who'd been evicted by the man he called trash. Grayson fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He called the holding company, demanding to speak to the owner. He was put through to a private line. "Mr. Sterling," I said. I kept my voice low, steady. I hit the speakerphone button so Daisy could hear every single word. We were sitting in my new rental, a cozy cottage in the countryside. "Who is this?" Grayson barked. But the arrogance was gone. It was replaced by a raw, jagged edge of panic. "It's Clint," I said. The silence that followed? Absolute. Terrified. It was the sound of a man realizing the trash had just taken out the garbage. You own the note?" he stammered. "I own the note, Grayson. I own the debt. I own your house. And more importantly, I own the digital paper trail of every pound you stole from your partners." I leaned back, watching the fire in our hearth. "And because I am a surprisingly generous man, I'm giving you a choice. Option 1. You sign over full, irrevocable custody to Daisy, renounce every parental right, and leave the country by midnight tomorrow. Option 2, I hand this file to the Crown Prosecution Service, and you spend the next decade staring at a gray wall." Grayson signed. Of course he did. Bullies are always cowards when the power shifts. He fled to Spain to avoid prosecution, leaving Beatrice destitute. She ended up in a cramped council flat in Luton. Surrounded by the common people she spent her life mocking. A few weeks later, the world got a little brighter. Daisy gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Leo. He has my eyes, and her gentle spirit. We live quietly now. The cottage smells like lemons and fresh paint. Daisy is painting again. Her art is different now. Darker, maybe, but so much stronger. She is healing, one brush stroke at a time. Grayson is just a ghost now, a bad memory washed away by the rain. As I hold my grandson, I think about that night. It's easy to look away. It's easy to say it's not your business. But family times is times your business. Love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. It requires you to move, to fight, and sometimes to kick down the door. If this story moved you, if you felt the bite of that cold rain and the warmth of justice, then stay with us. Subscribe and share this. Not for an algorithm, but because, somewhere out there, another Daisy is waiting for someone to show up. Be that person. Be the one who refuses to look away. Be the one who acts.